quickly go through the Haggadah with the goal of tips, practical tips, how to make it more engaging, experiential, relevant, exciting, so on and so forth. So I think the number one point to mention as an intro is there's no mitzvah to read every book, every letter of the Haggadah, all right? The Haggadah is a guide. It is a guide that helps us, but what's the goal? The goal is that a Seder should speak to the audience there. If you speak to the audience there and you hit the main parts, you've accomplished the goal. If you get every letter of the Haggadah, but you haven't spoken to the audience at the Seder, you haven't done the mitzvah. So the number one goal is, how can I make people tonight feel that this is relevant and happening now? That is the number one goal. And it's going to be different if it's adults, if it's kids, if it's teens. Teens probably being the hardest, right, Karen? So small crowd, but feel free to ask questions as we go along. But it's important, and I'll say this from the get-go, is it shouldn't be a long time ago a story like this happened. It should be, we're leaving Egypt tonight. We are leaving Mitzrayim tonight. This story is happening to us. So for those who like kids, there's ways to do it. Like, I know Seders, they can print out. I have copies here. If anyone wants any, whoever's watching wants any of the files afterwards, let me know. But a boarding pass. And everyone gets a boarding pass at the beginning of the Seder. Cairo International Airport to Sinai. I have files for all of these. And everyone begins with a boarding pass. This is what's happening tonight. We are leaving Egypt and we are going to Mount Sinai, stop off en route to Israel. Boarding pass, simple idea. B, go on Amazon and buy $10 props of Egypt, of a desert. I'm serious. I have the links. Again, they were supposed to be here in time and Amazon had a delay, so they're coming tomorrow, so I can't show them. But they're $9.99 on Amazon. And it just adds a little bit to the room that you have pictures of a desert, pictures of pyramids, pictures of Kriyas Yamsuf. You can have two nice hanging blue streamy things. Or they're more elaborate pictures of the splitting of the sea. These are all things because, and one of my favorite lines when it comes to the Seder is, in Hebrew, there's no word for history. You'll say historia, but historia is a modern Hebrew word. There's no biblical word history because history is his story. I'm making a joke. We have the word zachor, which means what? Remember. Memory is not his, but it begins with me. Memory, me. So this is happening to me. This is not history. We are leaving Egypt tonight. It's happening to us. That should be throughout. And the more you're able to play along with that theme, the more exciting it is. You can, whether it's acting out, whether it's discussions, different ages, we'll talk about different ideas, but it should be happening to us. And avoid terms that make it sound archaic and old-fashioned and once upon a time, or anything like that. That is number one. So if props help props, if boarding passes help boarding passes, anything else, you can decorate the room to make it feel now. That's tip one. Tip two. If, by the way, you are having a Seder with more than 3 generations present, I like saying this. We're going to have one with 4 generations, please God, because my parents are now great-grandparents, and their great-grandchildren will be there. And I like telling the crowd, you see the scene we have right now? We have great-grandparent and grandchild, 4 generations. How many Seder tables like this would it take to go back to Moses? And the answer is about 20, 25 Seder tables. Well, that was because 3 generations. So, yeah. If you have 3 generations, grandparent to grandchild, then about 30 such Seder tables. And that's like a wow moment. If you're able to deliver that in a good way, that's like, oh my gosh, this isn't that long ago. And sometimes I even like turning to the crowd. We have those 30 tables in front of us. Just imagine. This is the last century, and the century beforehand, and the century beforehand. And we can close our eyes, and we can imagine, just imagine for yourself, every table at another time in history doing the exact same thing. Same matzah, same mar, same wine, better or worse, same story. Maybe it wasn't matzah balls. Maybe it was something else back then. Maybe it was Sephardi. Maybe it was same mitzvah, same no chametz. It's incredible. Close your eyes and imagine. Imagine the Seder in any time in history doing the same thing as now for the last 3,336 years. That is the number. That's a powerful moment if we're able to do that. For icebreakers, ways to kind of set the tone or do something a little bit different. I did something a couple years ago. I thought this was cute. It works for some crowds, not others. Let me print it. Let me see my notes. Give me a moment. By the way, cute song here if you want at the beginning. Take me out to the Seder. Take me out to the crowd. Feed me some matzah and kosher wine. We'll wine and dine and we'll have a good time. And it's root for Elijah that he will soon reappear. And let's hope that we'll meet once again next year. There's a second stanza as well. It's very, very cute. This is the kind of thing people get into it. It's a little bit, again, anyone that's listening, whether now or after it's recorded, you want a copy of the song, tell me. You want a copy of the boarding passes, tell me. We have it all. Okay. Let us now go into some icebreaker ideas if that song doesn't work for your crowd. All right. Sorry, everyone. A lot of notes here. Interesting icebreaker. Stanford University, there was a graduate student who got her PhD in this following exercise. She had a room full of people and she established two groups of people, tappers and listeners, okay? The goal of the tappers was to think of a song in their mind. If I just did the song I just did, right? Take me out to the ball game or happy birthday. And the tappers have to think of a song in their mind, and the crowd has to guess the song based on the rhythm. This was a study that was done. Over the experiment, 120 songs were tapped out. Listeners identified how many? Give a guess. 3. Good guess. 3. But here is what's interesting. When they asked the tappers to predict how many songs the listeners would get, they thought it was 50%. And the reason was very clear. In their mind, it was so crystal clear. They knew what song they were having, and they were shocked that the recipient didn't understand it, because when you're tapping, it's impossible to not hear that song in your tune. And if you're the listener, you can't hear the tune. You just hear a bunch of disconnected taps like Morse code or something. This they used as a metaphor for how one generation speaks a different language than the other generation. And parents have a truth that they know is so obvious, and their kids don't get it. We know that, right? Which makes it incredible that right when the Jewish people left Egypt, Moshe wanted to overcome this problem. And he basically said, I don't want to have the tap problem. I want to have something that will stick for generations. So Moshe comes up with his brilliant, God really says, it's called a Seder. And the first thing Moshe tells the Jews when they leave Egypt is, you have to tell your kids. But in order to tell your kids, this is what I want you to do. It has to combine song. It has to combine games. It has to, I'm saying a Seder. What does a Seder have? It has something for everyone. Your food people, there's food. Your song people, there's songs. Your question answer people, there's questions and answers. Your family people, there's family. Your community people, there's community. There's right? A Torah class only hits a certain demographic. A baseball game hits a certain demographic. A Seder is a brilliant, brilliant creation because it has hooks for everyone. Sort of like Velcro. How does Velcro work? Velcro works because when you throw the ball, there's so many tiny, tiny hooks that it cannot help but stick. That's how Velcro works. The Seder is Velcro. It's an ingenious idea in which the tappers and the listeners become one. And Moshe, the first Seder happened, and it has never stopped going. So the Seder is the idea that tappers and listeners in Judaism should become one, that one generation should be able to convey an idea to another generation in enough of a stimulating manner by hitting every single sense. And that's really our job at the Seder, is to have enough hooks that something sticks. And I find it interesting that when you speak to Jews about their memories, often people's memories will be at the Seder. It could be something silly like that Uncle Harry would always do this, or this person would always get into a fight, or whatever the case. But the Seder, so this is one possible icebreaker to do the tappers game and say that usually one thing doesn't pass over to the next generation, and yet here we are 90 generations later doing the same thing. That's how good the story is. That's how it has to be a good story too. That's how relevant the message is, and that's how multi-sensory all the aspects of the Seder is. So that is one possible opener to begin a Seder. You have a question?
When was the first Seder the night before they left?
Yes, first Seder was the night before they left. So Moshe already had a Seder in Egypt, which was to connect that generation to what happened afterwards. It's odd they had a Seder in Egypt. They don't have to remember. It would be like telling a survivor in the DP camp, right, that they should remember what they just went through. But it made the connection between, because Moshe was already telling the people then, what you're about to do is historic, and people will be talking about this 3,336 years later. That is what a Seder is, which then leads me to another possible icebreaker. And I like this story a lot, and it's a good story. At the Peel Commission, which was when in I think it was 36. It was a British and American commission that was discussing whether or not to have the creation of the state of Israel. And at the Peel Commission, they asked David Ben-Gurion, who eventually became the first prime minister of Israel, why he felt the Jewish people had a right to Israel. And this is fascinating because, unfortunately, David Ben-Gurion was not known to be a religious individual. But this speaks volumes. He turned around to the British and the Americans and he asked, what year was the Mayflower? And they did not know the answer. He asked, what date did they leave when they sailed forth from England? What date did they arrive? What food did they eat along the way? The turkeys were in America. They need turkeys along the way. And he asked a series of questions and they got frustrated. Why are you asking me this? And he says, that story happened 300 years ago and you don't have an answer. I have a story that happened 3,000 years ago. They left on the 15th day of Nisan. And I know they ate matzah, and they ate a lot of it. And they traveled for 40 years, and they came to Israel on such and such date. I don't only know this. Every Jewish school child knows that. And you ask me, what is our connection to the land of Israel? That's an awesome way to begin a Seder. And I find it interesting that even someone who identified as someone almost secular, when asked, push comes to shove, this is our connection to the land of Israel. So that is another possible. So two possible icebreakers to the Seder. One is the Tappers game, and one of them is the David Ben-Gurion story. But each of them hit the same idea about what we are experiencing tonight is connecting us to 100 plus different generations. Okay. Throughout the Seder, rather than give long explanations, posing good questions, depending on who your crowd is, whether it's teens or adults, I like better. So I have a list here of questions. that you can insert at various points of the Seder that get conversation going. And I'll read a few of them. When you get, and here, Levi, pass this. Here's one. You're in the middle of a game? Okay. When you come to the part, Avadim Hayinu, we were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. Here's a possible question. Are we more free than our grandparents were 2 or 3 generations ago? It's a great question. Teens will chime in on this. They'll say, yeah, because now women can vote. Or maybe now we have so many luxuries so we can have so much more recreational time. And then the old folks will chime in and say, no, today we're so much more addicted to stuff. Today, no one thinks for themselves. Today, this is a great, great question that just, boom. The 4 sons at the Seder, famous part of the Seder. Let me just chime in right there for the 4 sons. I'm not really going in order here, but I think this is a very, very important time at the Seder. The question I have here is the wise son is unafraid to ask and learn. What would you like to learn this year Jewishly if you were bold enough? That's a great question to ask people. What would you like to learn Jewishly if you were bold enough this year? So you can either ask these types of questions at various points in the Seder, you can print them out in advance and hide it under someone's plate or cup, and at a certain part of the Seder, ask someone to undo their cup and pick it up, and you'll get conversation going. Again, those listening online now or in the future, I can send you a copy of these questions. We mentioned the 4 sons. I think this is a very, very good time to mention. We have 4 different types of Jews sitting at the Seder. One is very religious. One is very secular, and he says, I don't believe any of this. One is simple. One doesn't know how to ask. Why is it so hard today to get different types of Jews together at the same Seder table? Why is it so hard today to see while a war is going on in Israel, Jews fighting tooth and nail against each other? Would you be able, forget about Israel, would you be able to sit at a Seder with people very, very different than you Jewishly? And if the answer is a no, something is not exactly right. Now, that isn't to say you might not have the most enjoyable Seder, but are you able to sit down at the Seder with all types of Jews? The answer to that has to be a yes. And it is interesting, and I'm skipping around here, but when we introduce the 4 sons, we say, Echad Chacham, Echad Rasha, Echad Tam, Echad Ein Yodeh Lisho. One is righteous, smart. One is rebellious. We know how to count. Why do you think the Haggadah says Echad, 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 Echad? What do you think it's telling us? They all belong at the same Seder table. They all have Echad inside of them. They're all part of Am Echad. They're all part of one nation. So this is a good time to ask people around the table to make it a goal to have at their table people who are different than you, Jews that are different than you. A few other questions just for people listening online. Pesach Matzah Maror. To leave Egypt, Jews needed to have symbols that identified them as Jews. What symbol do you wear daily to remind yourself of this identity? Next question. What are plagues today that sadly inflict the people of Israel? The next one is a very personal one. Might do better after a couple cups of wine. But Egypt represents those things that limit us and restrict us. Who is the Pharaoh in your life that limits your life? What is the Pharaoh? And one person might say it's this device. This is a Pharaoh because I know that without this, I would be able to be a different kind of spouse or parent or teacher or anything. Someone else might say laziness. Someone else might say insecurities. And if you really are after a few cups of wine and you have an adult crowd or even a teenage crowd, and you're able to go around and say, imagine you could be free from something tonight, what would that be? What would it look like if you could be free from something tonight? You ask the Jews in Egypt, they would say, I want to be free from Pharaoh. If you could be free from something tonight, what would it be? And even if people are not willing to say it out loud, you can say as you drink the second cup or as you drink the third cup, have in mind and ask God that you should be experience liberation from that. You can ask some questions that are not as deep. What was a Seder moment in your life where you felt a special touch from above, where you felt something, a magical moment that happened? If you have a different crowd around the table, it's always good to reminisce of other special Seders in their life. And I have a few other questions here. We'll hold it here, but throughout the Seder, asking questions, very, very good. It gets conversation going. And again, the whole point is how can people talk about this like it's happening now in my life? And by bringing these sorts of questions, that's exactly what happens. Now that we're on the subject of life today, certainly everyone this year will be thinking and talking about Israel at every Seder. And in Chabad tradition, at least, we don't add items to the Seder table. The Seder has everything it already needs. Our job is to add new relevance based on what's happening in current events. But we don't have to add a new table, a new item to the Seder plate to think about the hostages. What we do have to do is in the Seder itself, find important ways to recognize what is going on. And I want to share just a few with you right now. Yes, I know there will be people who will be leaving an empty chair at the Seder. There will be people doing that. And if that feels right to you, a table setting and have someone's name who's a hostage, absolutely. I would rather than leave it blank, find someone who otherwise wouldn't have a Seder and invite them. I think that would be an even greater testament to a Jew that is unable to be at a Seder. And now I'm finding another Jew that otherwise wouldn't be at a Seder and putting them there. Personally, I think that would even be stronger. But if people feel that the empty chair speaks volumes and it would be a good touch at the Seder, then by all means, that is one idea that you can do. But B, there is a nice tefillah that was suggested. It was written by the chief rabbi of Israel. And here's the handout. If you Google online, Rabbi David Lau, Lau, he asked that this prayer be said in the Haggadah prior to the moving section where we say that in every generation they have risen up against us. That paragraph, V'hi Shamda, V'hi Shamda, V'hi Shamda, or many different tunes. Today, when we read that paragraph, first of all, we need no commentary. In every generation they arise to get us, but God protects us. And by the way, I think that would be a good time to say, thank you, God, for the miracles that happened 1 week ago, because 300, I was talking to actually a military person this week. They said 300, something like that is unheard of. Unheard of. No matter how good your defense systems are, it's like a video game. You're not going to hit all of them. And they said it's simply, we make a big deal about what happened years ago with 39 Scud missiles from Iraq, not killing anyone. Actually, one person died of a heart attack at the Gulf War. But we say that was a miracle. I think what happened last week is absolutely a miracle. Please God. But nonetheless, we know the thousands of lives that were lost, the 137 people that are currently hot. So here is the prayer that was suggested to be said right before V'hi Sha'amda. Again, for those online, you can look it up. Prayer to be recited before V'hi Sha'amda by the chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi David Lau. I want to suggest, so again, there's the empty chair, there's the prayer to be added. I would hesitate from being too depressed at the Seder, because the Seder is a story of hope, and the Seder, throughout all of history, has been celebrated in some very harsh times. And even then, it was a story of hope and positivity. And I would not want that the Seder becomes melancholy and depressing because of what's going on in Israel. We absolutely need to mention it, but it has to be in a way of positivity, that the same way Hashem saved us then, Kain Tielanu, it's going to happen now. So here is a possible suggestion of how to bring it into the Seder. In the Haggadah, and if you have a Haggadah in front of you, that's great. If you're holding the one over here, early in the Haggadah, it discusses a historic Seder that took place. And if you're using my Haggadah, it is on page 28. It's right after Avadim Hayinu. And it says there were four great rabbis, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, and Rabbi Akiva, who were gathered at a Seder in Bnei Brak. Bnei Brak was around 2,000 years ago. I don't know if it was Haredi back then, but it was there. And they discussed the Seder the whole night until their students said, time to say the morning Shema. That's a famous story. Now, what many people don't know is 2 points. Number one, this Seder happened in Bnei Brak, not in Jerusalem. You know why? The temple was destroyed the previous year. Jerusalem was destroyed. And yet, they still had a Seder. And yet, they still had a Seder, and they celebrated it so much until morning. That's incredible. That's incredible. But here's the point that I really want to get to. You know, like you get 2 invites, and you have to decide which Seder to go to. Has it ever happened? Or you want to, whether you should host or whether you should be a guest somewhere? We know from the Talmud that there were actually another big Seder happening that year by someone whose name was Rabbi Gamliel. He was actually the head of the Jewish Academy at that time. And it was also a famous big Seder, and people were there. But the author of the Haggadah wasn't there. The author at the Haggadah was at this Seder. At whose house? Rabbi Akiva's house. Why? Because Rabbi Akiva is known for being the optimist. Rabbi Akiva was known to be someone that no matter what was going on, he found positivity. He found a reason to celebrate. He found a reason to say things are going to be better. So the same way that in the Haggadah, they had a choice of which Seder to feature, and they featured Rabbi Akiva's, and it was the year after the destruction, and they still celebrated the whole night. We at our Seders, while remembering what is going on, the emphasis has to be positivity. The emphasis has to be Am Yisrael Chai. The emphasis has to be better days are ahead. And I like, so that would be a time you can insert it. Another time you can insert it, an idea, is there's a time early in the Seder where we break the middle matzah. And maybe at that point, pause. And I say, I want everyone to listen to the sound, and maybe hand out a lot of matzah so it's more visceral, more sensory. Listen to the sound of the matzah being cracked, broken, shattered. And like pause for a moment. That would be a time where you could have, so to speak, that moment of silence, and you ask people, what are you feeling during this time? And yet we know that we hide a piece of the afikot, the matzah, the bigger piece for later, because in Judaism, we always believe the best is yet to come. I'll say that again. The bigger piece is hidden away for later, and we eat it at the end because in Judaism, we believe the best is yet to come. We always have tikva, we always have hope. So even as it's broken, we know we're going to get that bigger piece. And maybe it would even be beautiful. We're hiding, the hostages are hiding. Think of making this part of our mishpacha right now has been broken, is separated, is in Gaza right now. Or there are those defending us in the north. They are not with their families right now. The matzah is broken. We know that the matzah is going to come together at the end of the Seder. So that's another way to introduce it. So again, just to summarize, 3 different ways to introduce it. One is the prayer by Rabbi Lau. either the empty seat or the filling up the seat with someone that otherwise wouldn't be at the Seder. I mentioned that even in harsh times in Judaism, they celebrated Passover with optimism. And maybe at that moment of Yachatz, when we break the middle matzah, we can ask people to think about the Jews that have been broken off and separated. And our job is to find them and to bring them back. And we cannot finish the Seder until they're together with us. So that is a symbolism you can mention. Okay, next, on a lighter note, for those that have kids that are listening, something I've done for many years, I think it's very, very fun, is to afikomen and have a scavenger hunt. And I've always done it, and it's really, really good. We usually start it during the meal when the kids are starting to get restless. They eat already, and now, but you could even start it earlier if people are getting restless. So rather than hiding the afikomen, I actually have it right in front of them in a box, except the box is locked. And there's a combination. You can get this on Amazon for $12.99. And there's a code. And one clue leads to another and to another. And by the end, they have to figure out what the code is. So I have that. Another device I use in the middle is I have, again, for the afikomen, I have this, which is a what's it called? Egyptian hieroglyphics. And there's codes written, and they got to, first they have the code, and then they find this, and then they got to match the message by turning it to what the code is, and they decipher it. So I have 4 or 5 different clues. And for anyone that wants those clues, I'll be happy to email them. A lot of my things are numbers because you can do combination locks. And it makes them have to go through the Haggadah. So I say, how many sons are at the Seder times the plagues times this, and that's the one code. And that leads them to another code, to another code. Or you can even have it for a simpler audience. You say, baby Moshe was placed in this. And they run around the house until they find the basket. There's a basket somewhere in the house, and in the basket is the next code. And the next clue. And the next clue, something else from the Passover story. And by the way, if they don't know the answer, then they run into the room and they ask the adults, where was Moshe put? And that's great. Now they're engaged. Now they're asking questions. So I have a version with 5 or 6 clues. Again, email me if you would like that. Okay, going further. In the Seder, every time we eat matzah or wine, we recline traditionally to the left. And that's as old as it's one of the 4 questions. One of the 4 questions we recline. We don't recline, by the way, when we have maror or dipping in salt water. Only the things that remind us of freedom, we recline. And I remember as a child, I was told the reason because in ancient days, the wealthy, the aristocratic class would eat in chairs, in lounge chairs, not at the table. And while they're on the recliner, they would eat, and we want to feel like royal class and eat tonight. And I heard that reason, but it never really resonated with me. It sounded very, I don't know, archaic, old-fashioned. Like what should I be thinking about when I recline? And I want to suggest you can tell everyone. We live in the world today with a lot of worries. We can worry about Israel. We can worry about finances. We can worry about, gosh, our kids. God forbid, mental health. There's so much that people are walking around with. The night of Passover is supposed to be a night where we don't worry. In Hebrew, it's called Leil Shimurim, a night that we are protected. There are, in fact, many people who have the tradition. I told my Hebrew school class this. They were shocked of leaving open the front door the night of Passover and not locking it. I told them they don't, I'm not taking responsibility. Every time you lean, remind people, lean back as if we don't have a worry in the world. Tonight, we tell God, it's all on you. I'm not worrying. I'm letting go. It's a good thing. Again, when you do these traditions and you give a simple 10-second reminder of what they should be thinking about as they lean, that is very, very powerful. So I would suggest that idea of not worrying. Okay, going further. Dayenu. So Dayenu is the best time to give little stories is about a part of the Seder that everyone likes anyways. And Dayenu, of course, thanks God in 14 different ways for what he did. And rather than saying, thank you, God, for taking us out of Egypt, it breaks down the Exodus in 14. I would suggest reading that part in English because that summarizes the entire story. And when I read the Dayenu, I remember it 1 year it really clicked because I had a baby that year, thank God. And I remember thinking, thank God the baby's healthy. I'm always, when Hannah was in labor, I would pray like, and no other time in my life, very scary time. And when they tell you the baby's healthy or looks healthy, it's such, God for it's a real, I don't know. You ever worry about that when a baby's born? But I remember 1 year thinking, don't just say the baby's healthy. Say, thank God the eyes are working. Thank God the baby's breathing okay. Thank God all the limbs are there and it's not missing a finger, right? Thank God the heart is good. And when you do it that way, it's that much more meaningful. And that is what Dayenu is supposed to teach us, that gratitude can't just be general. It has to be specific. So that is A. B, and I just shared this last night with the group. I heard from someone not long ago who, whatever, it was a rabbi that passed away. And after he passed away, everyone was saying beautiful things about him. And one of the relatives said, I wish half of what was being said about him now would have been said to him while he was alive. You hear that? I wish everyone is saying such amazing stories now. Unfortunately, no one took the time to tell him while he was alive all these stories, right? So at Shiva, oh, this time he helped me in this way and I remembered up until today. And at the funeral, someone says, this changed my life or whatever. There's the little things that, and he says, I wish half the people, half the things, a third of the things could have been told him while he was alive. So I think Dayenu is a moment where you can turn to the crowd and say, we're saying Dayenu to God and breaking it up into 14 steps of gratitude. After the Seder, sometime this week, find somebody that once did something to you in your life. It's a challenge. And go tell them right now what a difference they made to you. While they're alive, while they're in this world, while they can appreciate it. So that idea of Dayenu is something easy to speak about. All right, a few more. And I'll take some questions. You tired? There's a favorite story of mine that is nice. Hey, Arya, come in and we'll talk. We're just finishing up. One more idea, by the way, for either kids or for any time they have a crowd that needs to be engaged a little bit more. But throughout the table, I have like boxes. It can either be a birthday present or it can be some mystery box. And when people are getting a little bored, I ask them to open the mystery box and there's some random item in there. And they have to say how that's connected to the Pesach story. It just adds like a sense of like, so like I had a fire truck in there. Levi, how's a fire truck connected to the Pesach story? He's thinking right now. Open it up and it was a fire truck. I'm like, well, the kids are arguing. Ah! And then someone's like, oh, in the plague of hail, there was fire mixed in. So that was the answer. But it can be anything. It can be as obvious as a snake. It could be a basket. It could be I've written down 6 or 7 different items. You can go to the dollar store or you can go around the house and it's just a mystery box at different times. And it just adds intrigue if you have kids at the Seder and it's getting a little boring. For the adults, that's where you throw in the discussion questions. For the kids, that is when you open the mystery boxes. I know someone that did it very dramatic. He had a big box that had warning signs all open. Do not open. They put tape on it. They just made it very dramatic. And then at a certain point in the Seder, they opened it up. Part of the Seder later on, of course, is that we pour a cup of wine for Elijah the prophet. And Elijah comes during the Seder because the Seder is a night where we talk about our redemption from Egypt. So we think about the future redemption as well. So this is my favorite Elijah the prophet story. So if you're looking for a story to say, here it is. There was a student that once heard that very holy mystics and Kabbalists could actually see the prophet Elijah. And so he asked his teacher, the Baal Shem Tov, if there were any spiritual exercises he could do that if he did it, he too would be able to actually see Elijah the prophet. So the Baal Shem Tov kind of put him off, but he kept on persisting. What can I do that this year I actually see Elijah the prophet? It's not just an idea, but I actually see him. So the Baal Shem Tov said, this is what you got to do. If you want to see the Elijah the prophet, in those days when the rabbi said something, people listened right away. They didn't ask questions. So he said, take 9 boxes, fill them with large amounts of food. On the day before Passover, go to this little town. You'll see a little dilapidated house, knock on the door, and say, I brought you a gift for Passover, drop it off and come back. So the man gleefully said, that's all I need to do. It'll cost me some money, but I'm happy to do it. He did exactly as the Baal Shem Tov. He dropped off the food and the wine, and the people were so excited. They said, I can't believe it. But Elijah the prophet didn't show up. Frustrated, he came back to the Baal Shem Tov. He said, tonight's the second night of the Seder. Do the same thing again. Drop off more food. Again, does it, but nothing happens. Finally, the man comes back and he says, I followed your instructions twice. I haven't seen Elijah the prophet. He says, all right, third time. Do the same thing on the last days of the holiday. Drop off the food, but this time hide behind the house and listen into the conversation. I guess the Baal Shem Tov allowed him to do it. Before you knock on the door, listen into the conversation. So the man hid behind the house, and he actually heard crying from inside the house. And one person said, we have no food for the end of the holiday. To which the mother says, don't worry. Just like at the beginning of the holiday, God sent us Elijah the prophet, so too, maybe an Elijah the prophet is going to come at the end of the holiday and give us our food. With that, the man dropped off the food, and he got the message that he was none other than Eliyahu Hanavi. So if you want to see Elijah the prophet, very simple. Fill up boxes of food, call people in need, do mitzvahs. That is how. So we are opening the door not only for Eliyahu Hanavi, but to expose the Eliyahu Hanavi inside of ourselves. So that's a beautiful story to end the Seder with. If you begin the Seder with the story I said of David Ben Gurion, that is a beautiful story to end the Seder with. Any questions? Any people want to say something that they find challenging about the Seder?
Yeah, keeping the kids engaged.
Keeping them engaged. So when it's a crowd that's hard, you want to focus on less. Let me actually on that note. Yeah. Yeah, please.
But in the past, we make the kids participate in the play.
Play. They act out.
Yeah, during COVID, it was just, and they still did the play. So, and it gives you the whole...
Acting out is very good. And I should note there, the props I mentioned, the props at the beginning, the backdrops, but, you can take it all the way and you can, bring sticks and have snakes and put food coloring in a bottle of water and then turn it into blood. I mean, you can go all out. I know people who have plastic frogs and they throw it out at the Seder. I mean, you can really go wild if you need to without, you say, dam, blood, and then you pour food coloring in. Svardeya, and you throw the frogs, and you throw some frogs. These are the types of things. You can have someone dressed up like Elijah the prophet who walks in. So with kids, yeah, the more you have the mystery boxes, the acting out, the props, the scavenger hunt, you got to keep it going that way. And I'll add, aim for less. Let me just right now, and then I want to take comments, but what are the parts of the Seder that are most critical? So let's just quickly, for those holding a Haggadah, if you want to start first, you got to sing the steps of the Seder. It's called Seder because there's an order, and you can't go out of order. It's interesting. It's called Seder. This is just an interesting note. The night of freedom has an order to it. Usually you think freedom is I can do whatever I want and there's no script. But you know what? People who are very organized, They wake up and they have a routine. It's very liberating. It's very liberating when there's a structure. And I guarantee you, if the Seder didn't have a Seder, we wouldn't still be doing it today. Judaism is passed down when there is a Seder. Once it becomes all over the place, okay. So you got to sing the steps of the Seder together. Okay. Obviously, you're going to make Kiddush together. That's a necessary part of the Seder. And you got to remind everyone to lean to the left. That's not a bad time to remind everyone what I said earlier tonight. We do not worry. The step afterwards is urchatz, which is when you traditionally wash your hands. In many Seders, this is the ultimate effort. You finally got the crowd seated, and now everyone gets up to wash their hands. So some only have one person wash their hands. What I've done in larger Seders, you know what I've done already? I've actually brought Negelwasser to the table. And you don't have a huge crowd, and and it goes really, really fast. Yeah. But you have to prepare it in advance. Again, if you have 6 people, this isn't an issue. But I've seen that as being a derailer at the Seder. Important that when we have this, just some practical notes, the 4 cups of wine are not meant to be sipped. They're meant to be drunk at one go. They don't have to be huge cups, just about 3.9 ounces, but they should be drunk. Going in order, dipping it in salt water, that obviously everyone does. Now the breaking of the matzah we spoke about earlier. It might be a nice idea to give everyone a matzah to break this year and to do that imagery that I told you earlier about the Jews who are separated that we want to find, and have that in mind when we break the middle matzah. But now let's go into the heart of the Seder and to discuss what parts are critical and what parts are not. Okay. The first paragraph, this is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. This should be done. This should be done. Manishtana, there won't be a Seder in the world where Manishtana is not mentioned. By the way, something to spice it up. If you have people from different nationalities, ask them to say Manishtana in funny languages. Just interesting. Some Korean, Chinese, this, Spanish, not all 4, but it's just something that spices it up a little bit. Avadim Hayinu has to be said. Avadim Hayinu is the answer to Manishtana. Manishtana is, why is this night different from all other nights? By the way, it's not 4 questions. It's 1 question with 4 parts. How is this night different? A, B, C, and D. The answer to the question is Avadim Hayinu. So Avadim Hayinu answers the Manishtana, that must be said. After this point, you can mention outside the story about the 4 rabbis. You don't have to read every word. I think it is meaningful to mention this here, that even though it was after the destruction, they still had a Seder, because Jews have done Seders in the worst of times. After that, you can skip and go straight to the 4 sons. That's not critical, but it's an enjoyable part of the Seder. I encourage everyone to do it. I like mentioning that sadly today we have a 5th child. And who is the 5th child? The one that isn't at the Seder. The one that isn't even there. It used to be there 4, but there's a 5th today that isn't there. But I like, and remember the idea I mentioned earlier about how can we make sure that all 4 people feel comfortable to be at the Seder together, and how sad it is that Jews today, we should be comfortable being at any Jewish Seder, even if the crowd is not like us, because we're all one. Okay. When we finish the 4, by the way, a cute idea I've seen before is you tell 2 people in advance at this point to act out the 4 sons, but without anyone recognizing it. So you have one person ask like a nerdy intellectual question, and then someone else just jump in and say, "We want to get to the food already. What are you doing?" You know, and then the third person says, "What's going on?" And it happens naturally. It happens naturally. But it's a cute way if you want to plan for that in advance. You know, when you go around the room with people reading, again, it's challenging. It's good because it gets people involved, but it also, people space out. So I personally like audience participation more in the form of asking questions than going around. Better the one with the louder voice, like.
Right. And also we've done, like, we'll throw
Yeah.
dried apricot if the kid answers it correctly. correctly, if they just answer it, or like this year we're gonna Hershey Kisses.
Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. A better, like, I don't know, in people's mind, they think audience participation. Let's go around and read. And that, if it works for you, fantastic. But I have found that often, especially if it's a big table, people go to sleep. Better ask questions and get people going that way. Of course, singing always works. Now, at this point, the goal is to tell over the story, not to say every word. So once we finish the four sons, we have to say our roots started off on a low note. That's part of the Haggadah. It says at the beginning we worship the idols. We started off as a low people, but now look where we are today. We don't have to say this inside. Vihi Shamda needs to be said so loud this year, so loud. And every generation, people have stood against us. We can sing this again and again and again. It needs no, you should talk about the miracles that happened last week. You should talk about the fact that why is it that little Israel, it makes no sense, by the way. It makes zero sense that a country of that size is on the front news every single day. It makes no sense. It's prophetic. It's prophetic how the Torah says, what is the world obsessed with? Little Israel. Isn't that not normal? It makes no sense other than the fact that we have a mission to do in the world. At that point, the next 10 pages tell over the story. You do not need to recite the words. What you do need to do is tell over the story in exciting form and fashion, with questions, with answers, with props. So from when the story begins until the 10 plagues, there's no need to read all the words. Again, if you have a Hebrew audience, they like reading, great. If you like people, but you can just focus on certain parts. And I think more is less often when it comes to the Seder. You can even say, now we're going to pause for 3 minutes while people read. We're going to rejoin again at the 10 plagues on 42. And that's when we sing the 10 plagues. The next page, when we go through every plague being multiples of 5, that's not integral. You could do it. You don't have to do it. Dayenu should be said. It should be sung. On the page after Dayenu, it says whoever didn't say these 3 words didn't fulfill their obligation. Pesach Matzah Mar. So that you got to make sure everybody says. And that read in English. Pesach is this. Matzah is this. Mar is this. So that's the main part that must be done, but everything else can be summarized in English. Questions from people online, or comments or ideas?
I learned today.
Yes.
It's Moses that told the people that you need to celebrate the Seder.
The name of the book is called Haggadah. Why? The first speech Moshe told the people is Higadita lahagid, which means to tell your kids. So Moshe, imagine it's Moshe's first speech to the people after they get the news that they're going to leave. And he says, tell it over to your kids. That's the first thing. Soak up every part of this and tell it to your kids and tell it to your kids. Yeah, that's what Haggadah means. And that's the point of the evening, not to cover every word. And let me just finish. When Jews learn this story and they believe this story, it gives us a backbone as Jews. We wouldn't be here if not for this story. If we would have left Egypt in any other way, change of ownership, we escaped. Pharaoh died and a new Pharaoh took over. Egypt was conquered by somebody else. We never would have become the Jewish people. It took this degree of incredible miracles that made us have a whole new identity, and it instilled us with faith that we passed on up until today. So I think of it as one time in history Hashem did such incredible miracles, And that was enough to sustain us until today. Now, didn't do this shtick again and again. It happened one time, but that was enough that we passed on to our kids. And to a certain extent, as long as Jews tell over this story, and as long as we pass it down, there will be a Jewish people. And I'll finish with this note and then to any questions. Seder means order. And like I mentioned earlier, there's an order to the evening, but it also reminds us that there's an order to what happens in life. During the bad parts of the slavery, if someone were to just take a snapshot of what is happening then, they wouldn't realize that's part of a bigger plan. It was all part of a bigger plan to get us out. There was a Seder to the madness. And I think of all of Jewish history as one long Seder. Okay? Imagine all of Jewish history as one long Seder. So here is an interesting law that you may not have heard about in Judaism. There's a law that if you're in the middle of the Seder and you fall asleep, you have to start all over again. Now you might say, I never heard that before. But then Maimonides writes with one exception. If there are other people at the Seder and they didn't fall asleep, that's okay because it's still considered one sitting. And when you wake up, you can resume from where you left off. Now, if everyone at the Seder falls asleep, that's a problem. But I don't know if that has ever happened. So again, what's the law? The law is that the Seder can't be eaten in parts. It's got to be one sitting. But one sitting is still considered one sitting as long as some people kept the show going. The Rebbe once said such a beautiful message on this that I just love. I love. He says, all of Jewish history has been one long Seder. And unfortunately, at different times in our story, Jews have fallen asleep. Assimilation, persecution, lack of interest, lack of relevance, you name it, we have fallen asleep to the point where Judaism doesn't engage us anymore. So it's the job of everybody else to do two things. A, keep the Seder going, and B, keep the seat warm. That at any point when a Jew wants to rejoin the Seder, we say, we've been keeping the seat warm for you. Come and join and you can resume where you left off. That's what Jewish history is. One long Seder for thousands of years that we have the privilege of being part of. So it needs to be optimistic. Even with the events in Israel, the Seder can't be on a down. This is when we develop our Jewish pride from this night. Our Jewish identity comes from this night. Our pride in Jews, our pride in the fact that Israel belongs to us is from this story. From this story. The Rebbe would say that whenever we get in an discussion about Israel, we shouldn't say Israel belongs to us because the UN decided in 1948. We should say Israel belongs to us because this is the promised land that we left Egypt and God promised it belongs to us, promised Abraham and Sarah. And said that needs to be, before any political arguments, we have to say, very simple, this little strip of land was given to our people. So sometimes people ask me, yeah, but you're going to tell that to somebody. What the non-Jew cares about what the Bible says? Well, first of all, plenty of Christians do. But what about those that don't? And the answer just dawned on me. The point isn't that they need to believe it. You know what the point is? You need to believe it. Because if you say it and you believe it, then you speak with a conviction and people respect that. They may not always agree, but at least they respect you mean business and you believe in your heart of hearts. There's nothing to discuss about. There's nothing to apologize for. Israel belongs to us. We have to believe it. This is the story where we get that from. We left Egypt to go. That's how I started with the story of Ben Gurion. We left Egypt to go to Eretz Yisrael. So this needs to be an optimistic, positive night, and we have to pump ourselves up with faith and pride in being Jewish. We'll hold it here. Any questions? Yes.
So I have the youngest people at my table will be college students. So I was wondering about, I mean, these questions are great. I'll definitely use that. But when it comes to things that are associated with children, like finding the Afikomen, do you have a good idea of how to engage them in that,
Right. Right.
or the entire table. Maybe we don't put that just on the kid. I don't know. I think
Right.
they think it's fun if there was something fun about it.
Yeah. For Afi Komen for college students. That's a good one. Money prize. Yeah, but if you made I want to chew that over.
It's not necessarily the prize. I can always get them a gift
It's not
certificate, but
about the prize. It's about,
something
I
about
don't
the
think it should,
process or this.
yeah, like, I don't think the scavenger hunt would work for that age.
No, some way to give that it a little bit of meaning for them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What if the Afikoman was connected to like a pledge or something they were going to do Jewishly, right? And I have to think that through. But like,
Oh,
almost like a mitzvah pledge or something about a sign that they're going to, display Jewishly. Um, uh, I want to think this through a little bit
yeah, yeah, yeah.
conceptually
Please,
to
you can
see,
get
and I'll
back to
email
me.
you if I think of it. But that's what I would suggest. Like, hey, I want to give you this, but tonight's the night where we talk about our Jewish pride. Let's, they don't have to find the afiko. I mean, they could, but the goal is they're pledging to do something, and then they're getting something. They're getting something.
I mean, that's interesting.
Like
I like that.
some pledge that they're walking away with. It can't be too hard, can't be too easy, but something that will push them just a little bit to go out of their comfort zone. And I think that's, by the way, when I translate going out of Mitzrayim, I like translating as like leaving your comfort zone a little bit. We all have that comfort zone that we're, don't want to rock the boat too much. We don't want to. And tonight's the night we have a real pride in who we are, and we're willing to grow, to stretch for our Judaism, for our Jewish pride. So being comfortable, being uncomfortable, really good. I do think you can direct some of those thought questions about pride on campus. Let me go back to some of those questions and just make them teenage-ish.
Yeah,
Best Seder in your life you
I
can
feel like
ask, and
they're all gonna, they'll be able to engage with those questions
but
without
you
me
just
really.
want some of the fun also. Some of the fun.
I was just
Ask one
thinking.
of them to dress up as Elijah the prophet at that time. I mean it. Ask one of them to put on a white sheet or something, and they'll get a kick out of it.
Okay, I don't
You
know.
know,
We'll see.
ask them to act out the wicked son and debate it or debate it. The righteous and the wicked son. Not wicked, rebellious. I like rebellious. And then you know what else I would encourage? It's a
What?
night of questions. The Seder is a night of questions, right? Manishtana's questions. As long as we're asking questions, we are engaged. There's a reason why out of the four kids, who's the lowest? Not the rebellious ones. It's the one that doesn't know how to ask. Ena Yodea Lishol. Yodea doesn't care, doesn't know enough to care to ask. So I would say at the beginning, I want a lot of questions tonight. That shows interest. What questions do you have on the story, on Judaism, on Israel, right? I want questions tonight.
Okay.
Like, and it doesn't mean you need to know all the answers, but just asking questions is fantastic.
Okay. I have one more question,
Sure.
and that is how to gracefully do do this something the second half after dinner in a short,
That's
like what
that's
has
what
to be done
I
in the
know. If
second.
I knew the answer to this question, every time I had to do a public Seder, the food comes. Look, trick number one is don't spend so much time at the beginning, right? Like
Okay.
pace yourself. And it's
Right.
okay to like sing some of the songs at the end, you know?
Okay.
By the way, this is a fun one at the way end. It's not every Haggadah does it, but they have who knows one, right? Who knows one? Echad miyodea at
Mm-hmm.
the way end. Teens would love this, or college kids. Try to do it in one breath. Okay?
Yeah, yeah,
You've seen that before.
sure.
Okay. So, in Hebrew and English, something like that. But I think by pacing yourself, you don't have to do everything in that middle section. Even though the Haggadah has that, if you hit your key parts and fly through, and then you can talk more during the meal. After the meal, all you need to really do, you have to have 2 more cups of wine and do the minimum part of Hallel. So I think have low expectations. Do
Mm-hmm.
the first paragraph of Birchat Hamazon at least. Hey, we're
Right.
doing the grace after meals. We'll do the first paragraph out loud. Everyone can do that, Baruch.
Yeah,
Then
everyone
we'll
knows
drink the
that.
cup of wine, right? And then we're going to
Mm-hmm.
keep it really short. So we open the door for Elijah. We do Eliyahu, we sing Eliyahu Hanavi. And then in Hallel, just hit a few parts of Hallel. So maybe the parts that are the easiest, Hodula, I don't know what your crowd is and they do Hebrew, or
Right.
hit a few
I'll find
parts of
something.
Hallel.
Mm-hmm.
And then fourth cup, Lashana Haba Yerushalayim.
Okay.
What about lighting candles at the beginning?
So yeah, you definitely light candles at the beginning. And I should note, just from a technical perspective, because so many seders start early, do encourage people to eat a lot of afikomen, because it's very likely that might be the first matzah that you're eating after dark, because it gets dark so late this year. So
Right.
eat a lot of matzah at afikomen time, which usually people are stuffed by that time. But on a technical note. So I think by less is more, and by just third cup, fourth cup, Elijah the prophet, a few paragraphs, Lashana Ba Yerushalayim, and if anyone wants, we can stay on and sing Chagadia Nechad Miyodea.
Yeah. Okay. I think I have to insert it before. Yeah.
Right, right. And by the way, nothing is wrong during the meal to sing some songs. I know there's a Seder to the Seder, but when it comes to the extra songs at the end, it's not integral part of the Seder. So you could absolutely do that earlier.
Okay.
You feel people are leaving, and between soup and the next course, nothing's wrong with singing Chagadia then. I don't know.
Okay.
All
Super.
righty.
Thank you so much.
All right. Happy Pesach, anyone?
Happy
Hal, any
Pesach.
questions? All right, I'll sit with you afterwards and go through. Hal is all right. If anyone wants any of the files, I'll tell you.
Yeah, I'd like some. So there was
Okay.
a couple in the
Can you shoot me an email just as a reminder, and then I'll
yeah,
all
I
right,
will.
fantastic. Okay.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.